What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. I got a very exciting video for you. It's kind of a podcast format, but I want to talk about the hottest thing to hit the sim community probably since the release of Flight Simulator 2020 itself. I'm going to be going over the feature review of the MCDU or FMGS from the Fenix A320. Now, I know there's a couple of videos out there, critiques on screenshots, and there's the Autoland video where they did a pretty sweet Autoland. But for me personally, when I read the feature review article, I even told my buddy who flew the real airplane, I said, look, man, I thought I was getting ready to go to recurrent training. I was reading a hot topic and trying to just brush up on some material. That's how in depth this airplane appears to be. What happens is simmers and people who aren't intimately familiar with the aircraft itself may not fully appreciate the level of detail and complexity that is going to be occurring beneath the skin inside the computer of your simulated A320. So I'm going to take my real world experience as an A320 captain, and I'm going to use some real world examples to kind of break down and simplify some extraordinary key features of this Fenix A320. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to skip through the first couple paragraphs here. They're just talking about how their Discord is growing and a couple of the technicalities about the Navigraph cycle and the air rank data that they're using. But where we're going to start this breakdown is on this paragraph right here. This paragraph states the nav signals mentioned above are synthesized, meaning we calculate the reception of the signal and use it to provide a blend of audio and static. So if you're ever flying the Fenix 320, you may be able to hear the VORs at a distance, but you will certainly need to listen very carefully. All right, so I'm going to be honest with you. The last time that I tuned and identified a VOR in the Airbus and actually had to listen to the Morse code was probably never, maybe 10 years ago. I'm not sure, but that's just something that we don't do here where I work. I'm not saying that that's not a SOP, maybe at a different operator somewhere on the globe. They may actually require you to tune in a VOR and listen to the Morse code to verify that it is correct. However, us, when you hard tune a VOR station in the MCDU and you get the 3-letter identifier, that satisfies the requirement for identifying the VOR, and you no longer need to listen to the Morse code. So while the audio is a nice touch, what I want to get at here in this paragraph is that these guys aren't just modeling, a blanket navigation system. You put in your flight plan, you go A to B, and everything's going to be perfect all the time. They're actually digging deeper, and as we go through this discussion, you're going to see that this has actually become a very complex portion of the Airbus, and these guys are going to be simulating, from this article that I can gather, almost all of what you would use in a day-to-day line operation. All right, we're not going to go over every single word here. I'm just paraphrasing, but look at this paragraph here. The Fenix 320's FMGS then uses this technology to calculate its position by gathering multiple position sources and mixing them together to come up with the final best effort location. Okay, so what does that mean to you, someone who's not familiar with the Airbus? The Airbus 320 gets its position from what we call a GPIR mix, or a mix between GPS and IRS receivers. So when you're doing your cold and dark and you go up on the overhead and you want to align your IRs, you go from off to nav, you do all three of them, right? That's aligning the IRS system. Now, before GPS, that's all we had to navigate on in the airliners. We used to use IRS. IRS Drift was a big deal, and that was just something that was part of the navigation system at the time. But as technology has developed and GPS became more readily available, and it's been retrofitted to all Airbuses. I mean, I'm sure there's probably an Airbus out there somewhere that doesn't have GPS. But the fact is that the Airbus now, to get the most accurate position, it will take both. It will actually use all three IRs, and then it will actually use its GPS, and it will sum the total position and give you the GPIR mix, which you can actually see here in the position monitor page where they've uploaded a screenshot. That's what this mix IRS means. That's a mix between the GPIRs, and it gives you the most accurate position possible. Now, there is a possibility that maybe you don't have GPS and you no longer have GPS positioning. That's okay. You can run right off your IRS as long as they're properly aligned. So that is what they're getting at here with this GPS mix technology. The fact that they're coming around with this already right off the gate is pretty eye-opening to me, and it's getting me very excited for what's to come. Now, this line gets me here. This one gets me here pretty good. So, should you wish, you may deselect and inhibit certain radio beacons in order to observe the navigational accuracy degrade, just to make sure we weren't pulling a fast one. So what that means is, I think he's kind of referencing what would happen to a position downgrade, or maybe even a GPS primary loss, and you're downgrading your position capabilities in the airplane, which, I'll be honest, it doesn't happen very often, but I have seen navigational downgrades occur in the real life airplane. It's just a bunch of different circumstances around those few instances. But the fact that they are even stating that here in the blue, saying, hey, you can deselect nav aids and you can watch the aircraft degrade its navigational accuracy, you're already getting that feeling that this aircraft is potentially setting up to be one of the most advanced Airbuses we've seen on a flight sim platform. All right, the last part of this paragraph. The final row on this page also gives you an estimated error value on each IR. The longer the aircraft flies, the more these degrade. The Fenix A320 models this degradation accurately, so keep an eye out for this if you like doing turns or multi-sector legs. Just like they need to do in the real world, you may find yourself in some trouble. Okay, so what is he getting at by talking about the position inaccuracies? So at the bottom of the screenshot here, you see IRS 1, 2, and 3. This decimal value is the error value that is accumulating over time from your IRs. So not the GPS, but your IRS. And if you remember when I just discussed that the airplane gets its position from a mix between both the GPS and the IRS, while not necessarily critical, it is in your best interest to make sure that these IRSs are not drifting outside of their tolerances. Now, in the real world, if you're doing domestic flights, like say here in the States, like say Phoenix, LA back to Phoenix, maybe then a Vegas turn back to Phoenix, you're not going to see too much drift in these, but over time they're going to accumulate. So we have a couple ways to remedy this in the real airplane. There's two ways to align your IRS up on the overhead, and I've talked about this in one of my cockpit overhead videos, I believe. We have two types of alignments. We have a full alignment, and we also have what's called a fast alignment. So depending on where you work and what your SOPs dictate, you may be required to always do a full alignment. A full alignment is what you do when you're cold and dark, and you turn your IRS 1, 2, and 3 on, and you're good to go. You let it go through the full 7 minutes or however long it may take, depending on where you are, to align your system. But there's another technique that we use in the real world called a quick align. So if I'm doing just multi-sector turns and they're starting to drift, and maybe they're not at their tolerances. We all have, depending on your SOP or airline, you're probably going to have different tolerances that are acceptable. Once they get to that point, you're probably going to have to do a full alignment. Or if you just see them starting to drift, we can do what's called a fast alignment. And a fast alignment is when you turn off all three of your IRs and then you turn them right back on within 5 seconds, the aircraft will do a fast alignment, and that can kind of just help sharpen up some of your drift should you need to do it. So that is really cool to see. They're actually even thinking about modeling that. And, as he says here at the end, all this work culminates in an incredibly accurate and reliable navigation environment for our FMGS to take advantage of, ensuring the Fenix 320 always does what you ask for it. All right, so I want to kind of wrap up this FMGS, or this navigation portion of this video right here for you. In the sim world, you and I, we sit down at our desks, we get in flight sim, whatever it may be, X-Plane, P3D, FS2020, put in your flight plan, and you don't even think twice about it. As long as it jives in the box, you're going, right? You don't even really care about position accuracy and GPS accuracy. But why is this important? What is this? Why are they even going to the extent that they are to make this in depth? From my real world experience, position, drift, and everything, when you're flying locally in flat terrain, it's more of just kind of a nuisance than it is a critical phase of your flight. Now, when you start going into other countries, like particularly in my case, I do flying in South America quite often, you've got extremely high terrain, you've got areas of poor coverage, so monitoring your position and your accuracy of your position begins to become extremely important and critical in any case of an emergency. In real life, if I'm getting in here and I'm going to go down to Peru or whatever it is, I am constantly monitoring, I don't want to say constantly, but I am actively monitoring my position. I'm making sure everything is jiving. We have to do different navigation accuracy checks depending on if you enter Class 2 airspace, which is a different discussion for a different time. But what I'm getting at is in real life, this stuff matters. In the sim, it doesn't really matter. But that is what, in my opinion, begins to separate high-fidelity aircraft and fun airplanes to fly to actual study-level aircraft in your home simulator. All right, we're not going to spend too much time here, but basically Fenix is saying that it's quite difficult to demonstrate relatively simple FMGS functions like lateral and vertical modes via text, so he's going to publish Autoflight feature review where plenty of media will be shared of the aircraft handling for Autoflight. Suffice to say, every single Autoflight mode is modeled and complete. So what does that mean? What type of Autoflight modes do we have in the Airbus? Just a brief review. We've got our managed nav, managed speed. So for you Boeing guys, that's your LNAV, VNAV. We call that managed in the Airbus. That's when the autopilot has taken in consideration your speed and your altitude constraints. We've got our open climb and open descent. That's basically your flight level change if I relate it to a Boeing feature. So that's your full power climb and your idle power descents. We also have our vertical speed, plus or minus. We have FPA, or flight path angle, which comes in handy when you're doing selected approaches, or what we call green needle approaches. And we also have the expedite mode, right? So you have expedite, which you can have an expedited climb or an expedited descent. Essentially, you'll climb out at green dot or you're going to descend at VNE for maximum rate of descent. So those are your auto flight modes. Most of the Airbuses that we have in the flight simulator in present day all have these modeled already. So it's just good to see that they've already have those models complete. So that just means they can probably focus on other little nuances of the airplane, which is exciting to see. He says you can fly the absolute most complex RNAV, RNP procedures, or if the mood strikes, use the MCDU and FMGS to aid you in flying non-precision or even visual approaches. So I think he's kind of referring to the bird, right? I talk about the bird a lot on my channel where you can set to see your flight path angle, and it makes visual approaches extremely easy when you have the bird available. All right, so now he says we're going to cover some interesting MCDU functions that will help give you an idea of how extensive the MCDU or FMGS is on the Fenix 320. So Fenix's personal favorite is the FLS. Now the FLS system is something that's relatively new to the narrow-body aircraft on the Airbus fleet. I think the 350 already has this capability and the 380 might have it as well. So it's not necessarily new technology, but it's new to the Airbus 320 family. Now, I'm lucky enough to where I work, we're retrofitting and getting the software update on our aircraft. I haven't done a video on FLS yet. I know the Toliss aircraft, Toliss 321, is capable of FLS approaches in X-Plane 11 already, which is pretty sweet. That's something that the FS Labs doesn't even do in P3D. So Toliss has already got the FLS guidance mode. It's awesome to see that these guys are modeling it because this is going to become the future and it's going to become the standard for all Airbus aircraft coming off the line. I'm pretty sure FLS, as long as your company is willing to go for it, it's going to be pretty much standard. It's going to make things a lot easier for non-precision approaches and getting airplanes down and just simplifying things for the flight crews. So we're not going to get too much into it right here. I go about the mentality of I'd rather be correct and have something to back up my information than to be first. So I'm not want to get into this. I want to actually fly FLS approaches in real life in my aircraft before I really start giving tutorials on it. You know, I could read the manual and I can say, okay, well, this is supposed to do this and this is supposed to do that. But unless I have the real world experience to give to you, I really feel like I'm kind of doing you a disservice or maybe even just a lip service because I'm just, at that point, I'm just another guy talking and explaining the manual. So I'd rather have my own personal experiences to give to you while we go over FLS. So once I start flying those FLS approaches in real life, I will definitely be giving you guys a full-blown tutorial and video on that. All right, this is one that I think is going to get over or passed over by a lot of people who aren't really familiar with the A320 itself or just flying on an airline schedule in general. RTA, or required time of arrival, is a common tool in the A320's substantial arsenal of pilot aids and has also been modeled. So there's a couple reasons that the RTA is really handy for us Airbus pilots. He mentions VATSIM or just flying oceanic routes. So to get to his points here, VATSIM or oceanic flying, if air traffic control gives you a waypoint time restriction saying, hey, I need you to cross this fix at this time for traffic, which is 99% of the time why they give you an RTA on a waypoint is for time, then you go ahead and plug it in. But in more, common use, sometimes we'll use RTA to have the aircraft fly faster without changing the cost index, because depending on where you may work, you may not be able to move the cost index up or down. But if you want to fly a little bit faster and your VA, your virtual airline, doesn't allow you to modify the cost index, well, if you put an RTA with a lower time in there, you'll still have the same cost index, but the aircraft will actually be flying faster to meet that RTA time requirement. Now, of course, you got to be careful that you have the right fuel for that and that you're not, hurting yourself in other ways. But that's just a common point that I've seen RTA used. Now, oceanic, I've used this in NatTrax, or excuse me, not NatTrax. I've used this in the waters route, or the West Atlantic track route stricture system, which is basically east of Florida, pretty much all the way out past Bermuda. And it's a pretty common route structure when you're going, say, from Boston down to San Juan or any of those islands down there in the Caribbean. You're probably going to fly through waters airspace, which is what I fly commonly, as I don't take a narrow body across to Europe. But that's something that you're going to want to be able to know how to do when you start doing those waters routes, just going from Boston, San Juan, or maybe going from the islands somewhere all up and down the eastern seaboard. Now, of course, if you're going oceanic in a 320, by all means, you're going to have it and be able to use it now, which is pretty cool. Now, this is something that is a very basic function in reality, but I can imagine it's probably quite complex to actually get them to program this in a sim, and it kind of blew me away. It's when I read this paragraph that I really took a step back and was like, okay, I need to make a video dissecting and explaining some key points that are probably going to get overlooked from this article. I'm going to read this to you and then we're going to discuss it. On the Fenix 320, you can input an ETT, or an estimated takeoff time, in which case the MCDU will begin giving you the UTC time, that's Zulu time, of arrival for each waypoint. This is amongst the RTA's absolute most basic functions, kind of what we just talked about. But diving a little deeper, and this is what got me, if you don't know when you'll be departing, but you know that you must reach your destination at a specific time, maybe you have a commute to catch, maybe you have another, a flight going out after that, or maybe, this is a common one that I see, the airport is closing at a certain time, or there's a NOTAM that says the airport would be closed at this time. You can input this over your destination instead, and the MCDU will not only tell you when you need to depart in order to achieve this, but will also prompt you when you're getting close to the computed takeoff time in order to let you know that you really must get going, or else you're going to be running late, or perhaps maybe you even won't be able to complete the flight if the airport's closing. So this is a tool that I use almost on every flight. I don't want to say every flight, because there are days where everything's on time and there's no weather and you're good to go. But anytime there's abnormal stuff happening, you got weather delays, or maybe you have traffic congestion and everything's just backed up on the airport. This tool is something that I mess around with a lot. And the fact that you'll be able to have that functioning in its full capability on this sim is pretty awesome. So that's a little tidbit about the ETT. You could read the rest about that, about active mode and all that, and includes the winds. It actually can get a little bit more complex, which is pretty awesome. So glad to see them doing that. You can see an example of them using ETT. Here's your RTA mode. So basically you set, I want to put a waypoint here and the time that your estimated time, takeoff time. It'll tell you all the information. So here you go. Here's the ETT for, this is at LOWE. Or no, LOWG 1410, and then it will correct all the Zulu times for your wayplans. It's pretty incredible stuff. Again, he gives an example of an oceanic crossing. Say he gets an oceanic clearance and has been asked not to cross Lasno before 1425Z, so he can put in the RTA. The airplane's going to slow down and is going to allow him to reach that waypoint on time, so he does not violate that RTA. And basically what that boiled down to is the aircraft slowed from 7.8 Mach to 7.2 Mach, which that's getting pretty slow. I hope you're not too heavy to comply with the entry restriction over Lasno. Heavy 321 up high at 7.2 Mach, that's not going to work. You're going to be too slow. But that's something that you can play with. All right, here we go. We're going to talk about this paragraph now. ETPs, or estimated time to P, or equa time point is what it really stands for. These are also modeled in the MCDU and are available for you to use. By default, an ETP is generated between departure and arrival airfields. Should you choose, however, you may manually set up an ETP when crossing large spans of water to help aid you with situational awareness. Okay, this is really cool. So to kind of hit this point home, why is ETP modifying important? Now, this is a basic route here from Dallas-Fort Worth to Cancun, Mexico. If you guys follow the channel, you know I'm intimately familiar with Mexico, Cancun in particular. I've done a lot of streams into there, had a lot of incidents in there, and it's been a place in real life where I've had some interesting stories as well. So that's why I use this example. So on this route here, which I just auto-populated from Navigraph, they kind of gave me a weird routing all the way out here to, what was that, Leeville? Or Finet? Oh no, that's Leeville right there. Before going southbound. So kind of like the waters route that we were talking about earlier, which I'll kind of briefly show you right here. This is all water. So you see these tracks? These are all waters routes. So this is where that RTA and time over waypoint will become very handy for you. See all the Caribbean islands and then up to the East Coast. So this is the waters route charts that RTA would be helpful for. Now, as far as ETP and why do we care about the equa time point is not, some guys will just, oh, that's the halfway point between A and B. Well, that's correct. What I do in the real airplane is I actually modify my ETP when I'm flying over water, in particular expanses like this, the Gulf of Mexico. So what'll happen is if I'm going on this flight path down to Cancun, my Airbus will probably say my equal time point to Cancun is probably right about here. Now, I'm just guessing. It will take into factor winds and all that, but let's just say there's no wind. It'd probably be dead smack dab in the middle, right, of the flight plan, total mileage right in the middle. When I'm, over Leeville and now I'm going south over the water, why do I care about my equa time point being right here? When I'm over Dolphin, I'm literally, 55 miles from the shore before I have to head back. So it's really not advantageous to keep the equa time point right here. I'm not really interested. If I have an emergency right here, I'm not interested in going all the way back to Dallas. If I have an emergency right here, I'm probably going to just cut in to New Orleans because New Orleans is actually right here. So what I would do in the real airplane is I would modify my ETP. And what I do is I would select the airport that I would like to divert to and where I'm going to from there. So I would put MSY or New Orleans in my airport 1 slot, and then I would have it calculate the ETP from there to Cancun, or you can do as Madeira or Merida. So I could put Merida, but realistically, I'll probably just keep it Cancun and then have MSY. And now the equa time point will be calculated somewhere right about here. Again, in the real airplane, it will calculate winds for you, and it's all based on time. So it would probably be somewhere right here. So now if I have an emergency from going feet wet to halfway across the Gulf, if I have an emergency and say I'm over here, I know I'm just going to head back right away with looking at my ND. I know I'm going to go right back to New Orleans. I'm not going to continue on to Cancun. If I would have left that ETP over here, it's going to disappear once you cross it anyway, and you're literally just wasting a tool, right? You're wasting a resource in real life for you that, could help you out in a dire situation. So that's why modifying the ETP is important. And the fact that, again, that they're going to have that modeled is basic in concept, but it's one of those things that I think to myself, hey, this is going to be on a different level according to the information that they're giving us. Again, very excited for that feature. You can see, I believe she's in this example here. Katie is demonstrating the equa time point changing between Cork Island and Brest, France. So you could see this is that page where you modify it. I guess, that's Cork and Island and then LR or LFRB. So now instead of it just being your departure and your arrival, you can actually modify it where you want to go and distance from where, and it will calculate your ETP for you. So there you go. So LECO. So it looks like she changed it. So that's pretty neat to see that they are going to have that model. I definitely, when I read that, I was definitely getting excited. RTAs and ETPs may seem rather bland, but it's just this sort of thing that gives you the final 5% of your experience on board the Fenix A320. The fact that real pilots can jump into our aircraft and begin using these ancillary tools provided by Airbus to them the same exact way they do in real life is a testament to the painstaking attention to detail we have lavished on this aircraft. So that's exactly what I was saying. Why in real life I'm not going to waste tools provided to me by Airbus. As a captain on board an airliner, it is my number one priority to get from A to B as safe as possible. That includes any type of irregularity, any type of emergency that may come up on. That is all on my shoulders to make sure we get to our destination safely, or to an alternate for that matter, safely. So if I'm doing my job correctly, I am not going to let tools go to waste that are provided to me, because if God forbid you have an accident and you have to explain to the investigating team, NTSB, whoever it may be, say, okay, well, why did you go here and not here? You could have seen that your equal time point was here, and you went somewhere with a short runway and you went off the end of the runway and somebody got hurt, or even worse. So those are the things in real life that as a captain you really have to pay attention to, and the fact that they're taking that concept with them into this airplane is absolutely awesome. Last little thing here, he talks about step climbs. He says there isn't a great deal of hubbub around this. It's a relatively basic feature. Yeah, it is. Okay, you can put, I get a lot of questions on step climbs even when I stream. Essentially, a step climb, if it's in your flight plan, it's probably a good idea. If you don't see one in your flight plan, we really don't bother it. And, I might use this page if I want to calculate fuel. Maybe I'm having a rough ride. So let's go back to that experience in the airplane. How do I relate this to you from a real world perspective? The amount of times that I see a step climb in my flight plan, it's pretty rare. Sometimes flights over 3 hours, that's when you start to see them more, especially if you're in a heavy 321, because the 321 becomes extremely weight restricted on its altitude. So it can't really get up as high as you would like if you're really heavy and got a lot of gas on board. So if there's a ride complaint, say I'm cruising at flight level 320 and I'm getting reports that, it's smooth up at 360. Now, that's a 4,000 foot change in altitude. That could be a substantial difference. I could change I could look at my prog page, or I could use my secondary to calculate, how much fuel would I save if I go, up to 360. Or what I can do is I can just look at, okay, well, why don't we burn off, a couple, 1,000 pounds of gas, and then at this time I want to step up at this waypoint to 3.6 or 3.4, whatever it is. Now that's calculating, okay, if I go here and I calculate, boom, step climb, save gas, good to go. That's kind of more of a real world scenario that I would use for that. But again, weight restriction is another one that you're going to be using step climbs. Not a big deal in real life, but again, small detail, these guys are on it. All right, we're going to just blaze through these here, or else we're going to be here all night long. So closest airports, very helpful during non-normals. Come with a diversion, gives you bearing distance ETA to the airport. This is it's basically exactly what he says. Closest airports. So you go to the closest airport function, and it tells you where to go. Again, very helpful on long-range situations or over water situations, especially when you're doing oceanic stuff or waters route stuff or crossing the Gulf of Mexico. I'm relating a lot of this stuff to the North America. That's where I fly, right? So North and South America. But again, that's the best function for the closest airports. Fix info, a beam functionality. I've talked about this to exhaustion on my channel. The fact that we're going to have a fixed info page is awesome. I love to see that. Offsets, used on oceanics mostly, or waters. I use this very frequently on a waters route. In fact, when you're on a waters route, which was that route from the eastern seaboard down to the islands or vice versa, you actually have to do what we call SLOP, or the Strategic Lateral Offset Procedure. And it's up to the flight crew if you want to do it or not. But essentially what you're doing, you offset 2 miles or up to 2 miles right of course. That way, if you have a bunch of aircraft on the same tracks going across the water, it minimizes the chances of wake turbulence, right? If one guy's offset and the other guy's not offset. So we use these almost every time doing a waters route. It's, rather a small thing that you think about in the flight sim world, but the fact that they're going to have that set up and ready to go for you from the get-go is absolutely awesome. Here you can see he's done a left offset, and the aircraft will actually show you your original track path. That's pretty cool, and you'll be able to see how far off course you are, and that's just a good example. There you go. They offset left 5 miles, and now he's rejoining at that waypoint. Cool stuff. Predictive GPS, that's pretty awesome. I'll talk about that later videos. One of the most popular questions, he says, uplink directly from SimBrief for weather. Pretty awesome stuff. I know that the fly-by-wire also does that. That's pretty cool. This is what got me really interested here. Now, we're going to kind of wrap it up after this. But he says, we're working on expanding our AOC and ATSU services out. It is still work in progress. So for those that have followed the channel, say that you know that I say that the FS Labs on P3D is probably the most realistic simulation you can get on an Airbus. And the reason for that being is not just the airplane itself, but the sim that it is in. P3D, you have a couple of extra tools where you're capable to sync up with. One of the coolest features on P3D and the FS Labs is the ability to have a fully functioning AOC and ATSU service. You get your time set, you get your gate arrival information, you can change your fuel loading by sending requests out. So it really finishes off that full-blown Airbus pilot feeling as opposed to Airbus simmer. You know, as an Airbus simmer, when we're sitting at home on our desk, you know, we're simmers. We get in, we want to have fun, we want to have a good time. We try to do things as realistic as possible, but there are a lot of little small things that are, quite frankly, rather annoying and kind of tedious in real life that have to be done in order to get to the next step in that phase of flight, but they're just not implemented in simulators. Like X-Plane, I don't even think has the capability to do what FS Labs does with the conjunction of the ground handling plugin that's in P3D. So little ancillary stuff like that is what will really change your mentality, in my opinion, on being an Airbus simmer or really trying to be an Airbus pilot on your home flight sim. So I'm excited for that. I hope new details will come out. This wing shot is absolutely beautiful. Finally a correct wing and spoiler deployment. All right, so that's going to wrap this video up, guys. I know it got a little bit long there towards the end, but I just wanted to kind of share my passion with you. When I read this article, it just started getting my aviation juices flowing, and I really started to want to dive deep and help explain some little minute things that I felt that might be overlooked or might not be fully understood by someone who's not actively flying the airplane in real life. So that's why I put this video together. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, like this video if you want to see more content. I like it. As more content comes out from Fenix, I will be sure to diagnose it on this channel. So until next time, guys, stay safe, stay healthy. I'm V1. See ya.